Today, we are going to discuss the cycle of birth and death, samsara, in Theravada Buddhism. 26 centuries ago, Lord Gautama Buddha attained enlightenment as a Samma Sambuddha while meditating under a tree in a place called Bodh Gaya in India. Through meditation, the Buddha was able to realize the Four Noble Truths with no assistance from any teacher. The Four Noble Truths that the Buddha realized are the truth of universal suffering, dukkha satya, the truth of the origin of suffering, samudaya satya, the truth of the cessation of suffering, nirodha satya, and the truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering, magga satya. Now, during the night of Buddha's enlightenment, the Buddha also attained three special knowledges or mental powers. Through the first mental power, the Buddha was able to see his own previous births. And through the second mental power, the Buddha was able to see the death and rebirth of other living beings. And Buddha was able to see how other beings were born in bad places if they had performed unwholesome actions, while they were born in good places if they had performed good, wholesome actions. And the third mental power was to see the destruction of the Buddha's mental defilements. Now, the Pali word samsara means wandering on or continuing on. And the Buddha has said that we have been wandering on in this cycle of birth and death with no evident beginning for an inconceivable length of time. Now, samsara is not a place or a particular plane of existence. It is a process caused by ignorance, avijja, craving, tanha, and our intentional actions, karma. And through this process, one continues from one existence to another. Now, we can say samsara is also the process of re-becoming of the five aggregates of clinging from one existence to another existence. Now, what we call a person or an individual, according to the Buddha's teaching, is just a collection of five aggregates of clinging. And the aggregates are conditioned things caused by other physical and mental preceding conditions, and they pass away instantly with no stability. And they are always in a state of flux. And the five aggregates of clinging are material form, rupa, feeling, vedana, perception, sanya, mental formation, sankhara, and consciousness, vijnana. Material form or rupa represents our physical aspect, while feeling, perception, mental formation, and consciousness represent our mental actions. Now, Buddha has mentioned in several places that the reason for our continued existence in the cycle of birth and death is the combination of ignorance and craving. And in several discourses of Anamatagga Samyutta of Samyutta Nikaya, which is a collection of the Buddha's connected discourses, the Buddha said, "The cycle of birth and death is endless. The beginning of this long journey cannot be discovered. These living beings, hindered by ignorance and bound by craving, roam and wander on in this endless journey." So, for repeated birth and death in the cycle of birth and death, ignorance is the main cause. And due to ignorance, craving arises. And because of ignorance and craving, we perform intentional actions, karma. In the Vibhanga Sutta of the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha said, ignorance is the ignorance of the Four Noble Truths. Buddha said, ignorance is not understanding the universal suffering, not understanding the origin of suffering, not understanding the cessation of suffering, and not understanding the path leading to the cessation of suffering. One could say ignorance is also the ignorance of the true reality of all existing physical and mental phenomena in the world. The Buddha said, everything that exists in the world, physical and mental, they are all impermanent, anicca, leads to suffering, dukkha, and there is no stable entity called self, anatta. But through one's ignorance and perverted mental thinking, one sees unattractive as attractive, impermanent as permanent, suffering as pleasurable, and not self as self. Now, ignorance is also ignorance of dependent origination, paticca samuppada. Now, during the process of enlightenment, the Buddha realized dependent origination, and that is the process in which the Buddha showed that everything that exists in the world is conditioned by other conditioning factors. And the Buddha said, it is based on dependent origination that suffering begins, and also living beings continue to exist in the cycle of birth and death. Dependent origination consists of 12 conditioned and conditioning factors. And the Buddha placed ignorance at the forefront of the 12 factors. Now, Buddha explained how dependent origination works like this. Conditioned by ignorance, mental formations arise. Conditioned by mental formations, consciousness arises. Conditioned by consciousness, mind and matter arises. Conditioned by mind and matter, the six sense bases arise. Conditioned by the six sense bases, contact arises. Conditioned by contact, feeling arises. Conditioned by feeling, craving arises. Conditioned by craving, clinging arises. Conditioned by clinging, becoming arises. Conditioned by becoming, birth arises. Conditioned by birth, all forms of suffering, such as aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair arises. And Buddha also showed that in the reverse order of dependent origination, if one eradicates ignorance completely through the development of true wisdom, the other factors also will cease to arise. Now, in the second noble truth, the Buddha described the origin of suffering as craving, tanha. And Buddha described three types of craving. Craving for sensual pleasures that we receive through our internal sense organs of the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. And that is kama tanha. Craving for becoming, bhava tanha. And that is the craving to continue to exist even after death. Craving for non-becoming, vibhava tanha, is the craving not to exist. And craving arises mainly due to our ignorance of the true reality of all the physical and mental phenomena. Now, the Pali word kamma means action, but only actions that are intentional, volitional, and willful. If an action is unintentional, accidental, or unconscious, it is not a karma. And karma is a natural process of cause and effect, and it does not need any external agency or superpower to sit in judgment. Now, when one performs an action, it will lead to the consequences sooner or later. Now, Buddha has described three unwholesome roots, that is greed, lobha, hatred, dosa, and delusion, moha. And if one performs an intentional action based on the three unwholesome roots, it is an unwholesome action. And the three wholesome roots are non-greed, alobha, non-hatred, adosa, and non-delusion, amoha. If one performs an intentional action based on these three wholesome roots, that is a wholesome action. So, unwholesome actions or bad karma will result in bad birth in the suffering worlds, while a good, wholesome karma will result in a birth in happy worlds. And depending on the channel an action is done, karma can produce three types of actions. And that is bodily or physical action, kaya karma, verbal action through speech, vachi karma, and mental action, mano karma. Out of the three, mental action is the most morally significant because it is due to mental action that verbal action as well as bodily action occur. Now, depending on when a karma gives rise to its result or consequence, there are four types of karma. Certain karma can be effective immediately during the same birth. And there are some karma which will produce the result in the next birth. While there are other karmas that will produce consequences as long as we remain in the cycle of birth and death. And there are some karmas which can become ineffective. For example, when someone gain enlightenment as an arahant, some karmas do become ineffective. Now, in the Assu Sutta of the Samyutta Nikaya, Buddha has shown how long this cycle of birth and death has been. And Buddha said that the amount of tears that one would have shed during this samsara so far over the death of one's mother, father, brother, sister, son, daughter, and relatives due to the loss of one's wealth and due to one's disease is greater than the water in the four great oceans. And similarly, in a discourse called Himsa Sutta of the Samyutta Nikaya, addressing a group of 30 monks, the Buddha said, the amount of blood that one would have shed through one's head being cut off during the samsara while being born as cows, water buffaloes, rams, goats, deer, chickens, pigs, village thieves, highway thieves, and adulterers would be much greater than the water in the four great oceans. Now, according to Buddhist cosmology, there are 31 planes of existence where we can be born. And rebirth in a particular plane of existence is determined by our karma. Wherever we are born, in whatever existence, that birth is temporary. And rebirth and death will continue like that until one escapes from the cycle of birth and death. Now, among the 31 planes of existence, there are 11 planes of sensual existence, Kamaloka, 16 fine material Brahma worlds, Rupa Brahmaloka, and 4 formless Brahma worlds, Arupa Brahmaloka. And those born into the sensual worlds, they can receive and enjoy sensual pleasures through the 6 sense organs. And those 11 planes of sensual existence include 4 planes of depravation, apaya, the human world, Manusyaloka, and 6 sensual heavens, Devaloka. Now, rebirth in one of the 4 planes of depravation happens as a result of unwholesome actions. And the 4 planes of depravation are plane of immense suffering, the plane of animals, the plane of hungry ghost, and the plane of demons and titans. And according to the Buddha's teaching, it is extremely rare for one to be reborn in the human world. And the birth in human world is due to wholesome and meritorious actions that one has performed in a previous life. And rebirth in one of the 6 sensual heavens is due to extremely high meritorious actions. And the 6 sensual heavens are named Chatur Maharajika Devaloka, Tavatimsa Devaloka, Yama Devaloka, Tusita Devaloka, Nimmana Rati Devaloka, and Paranimita Vasavatti Devaloka. Now, the 16 fine material Brahma worlds, or Rupa Brahma Loka, the rebirth in one of the fine material Brahma worlds is as a result of developing one of the fine material mental absorptions, Rupavachara jhana, through meditation. A non-returner or an anagami, that is the third stage of the enlightenment in the Buddhist path of liberation, is born in one of 5 pure abodes called Suddhavasa. And the 16 Rupa Brahmaloka are named Brahma Parisajja, Brahma Purohita, Maha Brahma, Parithaba, Appamanaba, Abasara, Paritta Subha, Appamana Subha, Subhakinha, Vehappala, Asanya Satta, Aviha, Atappa, Sudassa, Sudafsi, and Akanitta. Now, one is reborn in one of the 4 formless Brahma worlds, Arupa Brahmaloka, due to development of one of formless mental absorptions called Arupavachara jhana. And the 4 formless Brahma worlds are Akasananchayatana, Vinyananchayatana, Akinchanyayatana, and Neva Sanya, Navsanyayatana. Now, rebirth in one of the 4 planes of depravation, the apaya, brings enormous suffering for a very long time. And as Buddha has said, rebirth in the human world is extremely rare, but it is still full of suffering. Rebirth in the sensual heavens will provide enormous sensual pleasures, but again they are temporary, and one is still in the samsara. And when the effect of whatever good karma that caused the rebirth in the sensual heaven expires, then one can be reborn anywhere else, including the suffering worlds. Now, rebirth in the Brahma worlds can bring mental bliss for a very long time. But one is still in the samsara, and that mental bliss again is temporary. And when the effect of the karma that caused rebirth in the Brahma world expires, then one can be reborn anywhere else. So, how can one get out of this cycle of birth and death, the samsara? In the Anubuddha Sutta of the Anguttara Nikaya, which is the collection of the Buddha's numerical discourses, the Buddha described how one could escape from samsara. Buddha said, it is through understanding and penetrating noble virtue, understanding and penetrating noble concentration, understanding and penetrating noble wisdom, and understanding and penetrating noble release. Now, as we have already discussed, ignorance, craving, and karma are the 3 causes of repeated birth in the cycle of birth and death, the samsara. And out of the 3 causes, ignorance is the main cause. And in the 4th noble truth, the Buddha described the path leading to the cessation of suffering. And that Buddha called the middle path or noble eightfold path. The Noble Eightfold Path was discovered by the Buddha during the process of enlightenment and then declared it to the world so that others can also cultivate the same path and liberate from suffering. Now, the Noble Eightfold Path provides practical steps that anyone can cultivate and gain enlightenment and liberate from suffering. Noble Eightfold Path consists of 8 factors: right view, samadhi; right intention, samma sankappa; right speech, samma vacha; right action, samma kammanta; right livelihood, samma ajiva; right effort, samma vayama; right mindfulness, samma sati; and right concentration, samma samadhi. Now, for practical purposes, these 8 factors can be divided into 3 groups. The first group is morality, sila, and that consists of right speech, right action, and right livelihood. The second group is concentration, samadhi, and that consists of right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And the third group is wisdom, panya, consisting of right understanding and right intention. Now, when one cultivates the Noble Eightfold Path successfully with diligence, as instructed by the Buddha, one can gain enlightenment or the state of Nibbana through 4 progressive supra-mundane stages. The first stage is stream enterer, Srotapanna. The second stage is once returner, Sakadagami. The third stage is non-returner, Anagami. And the final stage of enlightenment is Arahant. Now, a stream enterer can gain enlightenment and escape from samsara in the same birth, but if not, the Buddha has said a stream enterer will gain enlightenment within a maximum of 7 births and escape from the cycle of birth and death with no more rebirths. The once returner can also gain enlightenment in the same birth, but if not, the once returner will be reborn once more, either in the human or the celestial world, and gain enlightenment and escape from the cycle of birth and death. A non-returner, Anagami, will be reborn once more in one of the 5 pure abode Brahma worlds called Suddhavasa and gain enlightenment there and escape from the cycle of birth and death. An enlightened Arahant has already attained Nibbana and has escaped from samsara with no more rebirth. So the good news is it is possible for us to escape from this beginningless cycle of birth and death and all the suffering associated with that. And that is by gaining enlightenment and Nibbana. Lord Gautama rediscovered the path to Nibbana during the enlightenment and shared it with the world so that others can also develop it and liberate from suffering. And that is the Noble Eightfold Path. So by cultivating the Noble Eightfold Path diligently, it is possible for anyone to escape from suffering and the cycle of birth and death, the samsara. Thank you very much.